What if you found a book that could kill you?
A story buried for centuries, waiting to claim a new reader, one who can't help but remember. In the reader's curse, curiosity turns fatal, and silence is the only hope for survival. Every page turns reality darker, and every witness draws you deeper into the nightmare. This is Verified Nightmare, the channel where true horror meets the unexpected, where the stories are real, and the danger is never just fiction.
Ready to discover the curse that hunts beyond the grave? Hit subscribe and tap the notification bell so you'll never miss the next chilling story. Because tonight,
the nightmare is verified, and this time, it wants you. The discovery.
Michael Jennings never considered himself a superstitious man.
His days were measured in routines, managing a team, responding to endless emails, and watching the clock until he could slip away into evening solitude.
Yet his nights belonged to something else entirely.
Each evening, when the city's neon poles faded beneath the horizon, he escaped into the quiet sanctuary of St. Order Cemetery, an old, tangled stretch of land tucked along the river, forgotten by all but crows and occasional mourners.
There was something comforting about that place, despite its looming gravestones and twisted trees.
Michael told his few friends, those who still humored his eccentricities, that cemeteries offered true silence, a haven for the kind of deep thinking a desk and fluorescent lights could never provide. He never ventured too far into the maze. The caretaker once warned him about run-ins with vagrants and rumors of cultists who carved out lives among neglected tombs. Michael laughed at the stories but respected boundaries set by weathered iron gates.
That Wednesday night had begun just like any other.
The air tasted like impending rain, leaf mold, and memory.
He paced familiar paths, shoes crunching over last year's leaves, letting his thoughts unwind from a day's worth of frustration. Above, clouds pressed close enough to block out the moon.
Michael took a turn close to the old weather's crypt, the oldest part of the cemetery.
It was here, nestled between two toppled headstones, that something caught his eye, a faint shimmer, almost like the dying glimmer of a firefly.
He slowed, curiosity prickling at his skin.
Kneeling down, Michael swept aside damp leaves with his palm, revealing the corner of a battered notebook half buried in earth.
The stone beside it bore a date, faded but legible, 1841. He paused, heart pounding with irrational anticipation. The notebook's leather cover had faded to bone white, flecked with streaks of rust and mold.
Someone, perhaps a century ago, had scrawled a single word on the front: caution. No name, no owner.
Michael traced the letters, wondering if this was a trick, a prop for some local kid's Halloween story.
He glanced over his shoulder, sensing for the first time that night the suffocating quiet pressing in from all sides. The only sound was a solitary crow, picking its seeds atop one grave.
Michael felt the urge to leave, but instead, he pressed deeper, determined to uncover whatever lay hidden in the soil. He lifted the notebook, expecting it to crumble, but somehow the binding held. By the time Michael reached his apartment, he'd barely registered the walk home. He moved as if in a trance, fingers clutching the book as if fearing it might vanish before he could unlock its secrets. Inside, washing mud from his hands, Michael sat at his desk and flipped on the lamp. In the harsh white glow, caution looked even older, more sinister. He opened it slowly, careful not to tear the pages.
The first entry was written in perfect, looping script, the kind rarely seen outside antique stores.
Michael squinted, trying to make out the faded ink.
Death is a transition for the ordinary soul from miserable earthly suffering to something new, unexplored, and beautiful. He hesitated, unsure whether to read further.
Something in the wording sent an icy ripple down his spine.
Was this some kind of poetry? Or a confession?
Michael turned the pages, scanning passages about haunted nights, forbidden crypts, and encounters with the supernatural. Each entry felt personal, as if the writer were not just recounting nightmares, but inviting him to share in them.
Minutes melted into hours.
Michael devoured page after page, lost to the world outside his small apartment. He forgot his dinner, ignored the ringing phone. By the time he looked up, it was past midnight, the street below swallowed by mist. He shut the notebook, but the sense of unease lingered, a weight behind his eyes.
He wondered who had written it, and more importantly, why they'd buried it in St. Auder's cemetery for him to find. The final entry, penned in scarlet ink that looked disturbingly fresh, carried a warning. To read these words is to invite what lies beyond the veil.
Michael tried to shake off the dread, rationalizing that he was just tired, that his mind was playing tricks on him. Still, as he prepared for bed, he found himself locking the windows, something he hadn't done in years. In the hallway, the notebook sat atop his desk like a sleeping beast, waiting to be awoken. Sleep came fitfully.
When Michael closed his eyes, he saw flickers of ancient gravestones, heard whispers behind the wind. He awoke with a gasp in the pre-dawn gloom, heart thudding in his chest.
That morning, Michael made up his mind to learn more about Cemetery Romance, the manuscript as rumoured companion, infamous in obscure academic circles for the tragedies that followed anyone who read it.
Was it a coincidence that he had stumbled on a book called Caution? Or was he being drawn into something far darker? An old legend that promised nothing but misery and madness.
With the sun barely lighting his window, Michael thumbed through the notebook once more, determined to piece together the truth.
He didn't know it yet, but the discovery would unravel everything he believed about reason, reality, and the thin boundary between life and death. Outside, the wind carried the sounds of waking city, oblivious to the secret Michael now guarded. Somewhere beneath old gravestones, the past stirred, waiting for its next page to be turned. Unraveling the legend, Michael Jennings sipped his morning coffee, the bitter taste lingering more than usual. The notebook lay open on the kitchen counter, its presence so commanding that he felt compelled to glance at it every few moments, as if expecting something to shift in the fading ink. He hadn't slept well.
With each passing hour, the notebook's warnings haunted his memory, invading his thoughts with cryptic phrases.
His mind replayed the last entry. To read these words is to invite what lies beyond the veil, a warning that sounded increasingly less fantastical and more like a direct challenge.
Assembling mental resolve, Michael donned his coat and decided to visit the university. In a city layered with history and rumour, the best resource for obscure manuscripts and local legends was the reference section of Hunter Library, home to stacks of forgotten wisdom and the occasional eccentric archivist.
If the stories hinted within Caution were true, someone in the academic world would know its companion piece, Cemetery Romance.
He passed bustling students and slammed doors, blending in among the scholarly chaos. The librarian on duty, a wiry man named Eric Spencer, with wire-rimmed glasses and a penchant for rare books, recognized Michael from prior research trips for his company's marketing department.
"What brings you here so early, Jennings?"
Eric asked, peering curiously at the battered notebook in Michael's grip.
"Looking for another last document?" "Something like that," said Michael, sliding the notebook across the counter.
"Ever heard of Cemetery Romance?
Or this Caution?" Eric picked up the book gingerly, brows furrowing.
"Cemetery Romance is locally infamous," he said.
"There's a story."
He gestured for Michael to follow him into the stacks. In the secluded reference aisle, surrounded by faded volumes, Eric recounted the legend. Somewhere in the late 19th century, an unnamed manuscript dubbed Cemetery Romance was published in a limited run. Almost immediately, those who read it succumbed to bizarre illnesses, obsessions, even suicide. The manuscript vanished, only to resurface decades later as the subject of whispered conversation among literature professors and graveyard aficionados. Eric explained that no verified copy had ever been catalogued in the library's vast archives. Michael leaned in. "What about Caution?" Eric was less certain. "We've got references to warnings, that's all."
There's always been talk of certain texts you're not supposed to read at night, ones that seem to alter things.
But it's usually superstition, urban legend. Someone wrote this, Michael pressed, tapping the notebook.
They found it in St. Alder's. The handwriting's old, but there's something about it, Eric shrugged. St. Alder's has a reputation. Weird things happen, missing pets, lights in the crypt.
Some say it dates to before the Civil War. You might check with the caretaker, old Tom.
He claims he's seen everything in that place.
Michael thanked the librarian, pocketed the notebook, and headed outside. It was colder now, the wind scraping through bare branches along the cemetery wall. He crossed the city, feeling as if each block brought him closer to something dangerous but inescapable. St. Alder's caretaker was an institution unto himself, a southern transplant named Tom Brubaker, silver-haired and storytelling by nature.
Tom greeted Michael with a wave and a wary look. "You're back quick," Tom drawled. "Looking for trouble again?"
Michael showed him the notebook.
"Ever see something like this here?"
Tom eyed the relic for a long while, then nodded.
"Legends say there's a curse on this land. Folks digging up secrets doesn't end well.
I seen odd folks reading at night, leaving flowers for graves nobody visits.
Years ago, a woman found a book out back and went mad."
Never been the same. Michael shivered but pressed on. "I need to know who wrote it."
Tom pointed toward the oldest part of the cemetery. "If you want answers, start with the Weathers family. There's a plot there, 3 gravestones, no dates. They say one was a writer, lost to grief.
Left warnings all over the place.
You want to dig deeper, so be it.
But some stories are meant to be left buried." Leaving Tom's faded office, Michael returned to the Weathers crypt.
The place felt different by daylight, less threatening, but colder, as if the temperature dropped just for him. He crouched by the stones, searching for a name or a clue.
Carved into the base of the largest marker was a single word in elegant script. "Caution," Michael gasped. It was the same word, the same script as his notebook. The air thickened, shadows crawling across the marble like ink.
Was this the origin of the curse or its latest chapter?
On a hunch, Michael snapped a photo and sent it to Eric at the library.
Within minutes, Eric messaged back, stunned. That marker predates records. It's not even on the cemetery registry. Hours later, back at home, Michael combed through the notebook's entries again. Details leapt out, descriptions of townsfolk, lost loves, and the temptation to uncover secrets best left alone. The handwriting changed midway, growing hurried, then frantic, as if the author was racing against time or fear.
Michael mapped connections across the city. The Weathers plot, old Tom's warnings, Eric's academic legends.
Patterns emerged, dates matched up with missing persons, unexplained deaths, and small-town scandals whispered behind closed doors.
The more he read, the more Michael felt something watching, lurking at the edge of his understanding.
That night, he made a decision.
The curse was real, whether supernatural or psychological.
He would not be its next victim. He would use what little time and clarity remained to uncover the truth behind cemetery romance. As he drifted to sleep, notebook clutched in his arms, Michael wondered who else had held its pages. How many had listened to its warnings, and how many had ignored them until it was too late? Somewhere, beyond sleep, the line between legend and reality blurred. But Michael was resolved.
He would dig deeper. No longer just a reader, but an investigator, racing against the shadow of a curse whose story was only beginning. First night terrors. Michael Jennings woke before dawn, sweat-soaked and tangled in sheets. The city outside his apartment devolved into a distant, muffled thrum, unimportant against the specters swirling in his mind. He fumbled for the lamp and blinked at the notebook still firmly in his grasp, as though his subconscious feared what might happen if he let it leave his sight. Somehow, fragments of dream clung to him. He remembered moss-covered headstones, cold fingers brushing his shoulder, and voices whispering his name through a fog only half lit by moonlight. In the vision, A faceless figure traced caution in the dirt with crimson, beckoning for Michael to follow. Waking didn't deliver relief.
The same sense of dread burrowed deep in his chest. He tried to dismiss it as stress, a byproduct of diving too deeply into local myths and sleepless research.
But the city morning felt unreal. Pieces slightly out of focus, shadows stretching the wrong way, sounds echoing with uncanny delay. Michael's apartment felt colder, the notebook casting a strange weight from the kitchen counter as if daring him to open it anew.
Still, curiosity proved stronger than fear. Drawn to the faded pages, Michael sat and read entries aloud, his voice echoing in the quiet. Stories emerged, a nameless writer tormented by visions, spectral children playing between graves, and crypts that moaned with voices of the forgotten.
Each tale, though framed as fiction, mirrored elements gleaned from the Weathers plot and old Tom's stories, overlapping timelines, names, and grief lingering like a malignant fog. His phone vibrated Eric from the library, promising to search deeper into cemetery records and faded city journals, piecing together clues about the Weathers family and the origins of the text.
"Be careful," the message ended.
People get obsessed with this stuff, intent on breaking the spiral. Michael called Jenny Carter, an old friend and columnist for the city paper. Jenny was one of the few who humored his offbeat interests.
When she answered, Michael heard the hum of traffic and her breezy, caffeinated tone.
"Long time, Mike. Got something for me?"
"I need your help," Michael said, voice tight.
He relayed the legends, Eric's findings, and his own unease, nearly apologizing for how paranoid it all sounded.
But Jenny didn't laugh. She listened, then offered to ask around about recent local suicides, missing persons, or unpublished manuscripts linked to the cemetery.
"Meet me tonight,"
she offered. "If there's a story, I want front row seats."
Michael agreed, grateful for the anchor of her skepticism.
They planned to meet at a neighborhood diner near St. Alder's, a throwback kind of place where the coffee was endless and the pie only sometimes tasted of freezer burn. For the first time since finding the notebook, Michael felt a modicum of hope. Yet as night fell, anxieties redoubled. He'd avoided the book all afternoon, but when he tried to leave for the diner, he felt compelled to check its last page, confirming the warning in scarlet remained unchanged. To read these words is to invite what lies beyond the veil. He shut the notebook with trembling fingers,
locked the apartment, and stepped outside.
At the diner, Jenny slid into the booth across from him, hair pulled back, notebook in hand.
"You look like you've seen a ghost, Jennings." He didn't laugh.
Instead, he recounted his fevered dreams and the subtle shifts in reality, clock hands jumping minutes, lights dimming for no reason, the ever-present dread that something had followed him out of St. Alder's.
Jenny jotted notes, brow furrowed. "I made a few calls," she said quietly. "Seems there were 3 suicides last month, all a bit odd, but they don't match the legend exactly." She paused. "But the widow of the last victim said he was obsessed with a forbidden book, something he claimed to find near the old Weathers crypt."
"She burned it after he died, swore it was evil." Chills climbed Michael's spine.
"That matches what I found." Jenny folded her arms.
"Mike, are you sure you shouldn't just destroy that notebook? Throw it in the river?"
He shook his head. "The library doesn't even have a record of it. The Weathers plot isn't on any official map, but the graves and caution script match. Someone wanted this story hidden, but also left trails, deliberate markers for people like me." Jenny tapped her pen nervously.
"I don't believe in curses, but I've reported on enough tragedies to know some stories feed themselves a mix of bad luck and obsession."
"Promise me you'll be careful?" Michael managed a half-hearted smile.
"I'll try, but I need to see how deep this goes." They talked until late. By the time Michael returned home, rain lashed the city.
In the dark, his apartment felt foreign, long shadows, phantom creaks, every breath loud in the silent gloom.
He left the notebook on his desk, expecting nothing more than insomnia. But when sleep came, so did new nightmares.
He wandered an endless cemetery, every grave inscribed with his name, each cross creaking as if in silent laughter. He ran, pages of the notebook fluttering around him like dying moths, the faceless figure always at the periphery, whispering, "To read these words is to invite what lies beyond the veil." He woke again, mind cracking at the edge of sanity, gripped by a single desperate certainty. The notebook was changing him, and behind the words, something waited watching, hungering for the next reader. The publisher's fate. The days after the diner became a blur for Michael Jennings. Sleep came in scraps, and the waking hours formed an uneasy vigil, a perpetual cycling between the reality of city noise and the soft, invasive whispers that seemed to emanate from the battered notebook. He grew distant, snapping at colleagues, missing deadlines, skipping meals. Even his own reflection in the bathroom mirror appeared thinner, haunted by eyes ringed in exhaustion. Still, he clung to the law of answers, a compulsion that kept him returning to the cursed pages each evening, no matter the cost. He found himself staring at the publisher's card one rain-smeared afternoon, its edges curled beneath a mound of receipts on his desk. Fletcher & Sons Publishing. Michael could barely remember leaving the office with the intention of pitching the notebook for a historical reprint. The thought now seemed reckless, as if a different man, one less touched by dread, had set the plan in motion. Regardless, the itch to share this strange discovery had already worked its way into his psyche. He dialed the number, each ring growing heavier. The senior partner, Alan Fletcher, answered, his voice brisk but curious. Michael explained he had an unusual manuscript with historical value, and Alan agreed to see him the following day. It was not lost on Michael how eager, even desperate, some publishers were for lost legends to sell as literary curios. Fletcher & Sons occupied 3 floors in a wedge-shaped brick building downtown, their office cluttered with half-forgotten projects and posters touting minor bestsellers. Michael arrived clutching the notebook, beads of rain clinging to his coat. Alan, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with a prematurely grey beard, ushered him into a makeshift conference room lined with teetering piles of manuscripts. "So, you mentioned something extraordinary," Alan said, studying Michael's nervous fidgeting. "Let's see it." Michael produced the notebook, recounting the legend of cemetery romance and his recent discoveries. Alan paged through the first entries, eyes narrowing. He turned thoughtful, then faintly amused. "Cursed books are great for publicity. There's always an audience for haunted history." Alan's tone mingled skepticism with marketing glee. Michael interrupted, lowering his voice. "It's not a gimmick, Mr. Fletcher. People believe this thing killed before. Maybe that's just coincidence or mass hysteria. But once it's out there, you can't undo it." Alan glanced up, a glimmer of doubt entering his gaze. "You're serious?" Michael nodded. "If you print it, just be careful who reads it. Print a small number. Maybe include a preface warning it's all legend." Alan smiled faintly. "Leave that to us. We'll call it a Gothic Americana edition." "But you," Jennings, get some rest. Contracts were signed that day. A tidy sum promised for the rights to republish, and Alan insisted the notebook remain overnight for the typesetter to examine. Walking home, Michael felt as if the weight had shifted from his hands to someone else's, but dread clung to him all the same. The next morning brought calamity. Michael arrived at Fletcher & Sons to find police cars idling at the curb. On the sidewalk, secretaries huddled beneath umbrellas, voices hushed and faces ashen. Inside, the receptionist's eyes were rimmed red. "It's Alan," she said, barely above a whisper. "They found him in his office early this morning. No signs of trauma, but he hadn't left the building since last night." Michael's heart raced. He pushed past the murmurs, catching sight of the paramedics wheeling out the covered body. He spotted Eric, who must have heard the news as quickly as it broke. "I came as soon as I heard," Eric breathed, keeping his voice down. He was obsessed. Read through the whole notebook several times,
wouldn't even let the typesetter try a page. They say he wore himself out. Maybe a heart attack, Michael protested, shaking.
He was healthy. This doesn't make sense. It's the book, Eric.
It's doing something. Alan's the latest, but there were others too. Michael remembered the widow Jenny mentioned, the suicides, the burnings.
Eric looked spooked but tried to steady him. Mike, whatever's happening, you need to stop with the manuscript. Get rid of it. Destroy it. But a strange compulsion burned in Michael's chest.
The notebook had never left his mind, even when it left his hands.
There was something unfinished, a story evolving beyond his control. Weeks passed in anxious fragments. Fletcher and Sons, shaken by the tragedy, went ahead with the tiny print run, each copy accompanied by a heavy warning. This book carries a legend, reader beware. Michael tried to convince himself it was just a tragic coincidence. A perfect storm of urban legend, obsession, and human frailty. But the city's rumor mill spun fast. Journalists hinting at haunted scripts and another suicide linked to the first reader of the new edition. Michael avoided all press, but Jenny kept him updated, her tone now wary, almost fearful of him.
Most frightening of all were the dreams. Every night, Michael found himself in St. Alders wandering among ragged stones, the gravestones carrying the names of all who had touched the manuscript. He'd see Alan Fletcher's visage among them, sometimes smiling, sometimes sobbing as voices whispered, urging Michael further into the dark.
Something waited for him, an ending unresolved. In the deepest hour of night, Michael realized he no longer needed to read the notebook.
Its words were already within him, stamped upon his memory. Whether curse or contagion, the story had claimed him as surely as it had anyone else. And with terrifying clarity, Michael understood its reach would not stop until someone paid the price in full.
The circle widened. The city awoke in fog, the streets smudged grey and indistinct, as if reality itself had become uncertain. Michael Jennings hung back from his window as the sun crept up, illuminating a world where nothing felt quite safe anymore.
He watched people slipping between shadows on the sidewalk, dog walkers, delivery men. A nurse still in her scrubs wondering, with a chill, whose lives might already have been touched by his accidental discovery. His phone buzzed early, Jenny Carter's name blinking vulnerably against the battered screen.
"Michael," she whispered, her voice raw. "It's happened again. The new edition, the reader from the university.
They found him last night.
No one's saying much yet.
They think he took pills, left a note. But get this, the note just said, 'I had to finish the story.'" Michael's hand trembled as he hung up.
The dread he'd felt before was nothing compared to the cold certainty now blooming in his gut. The curse was loose, and with every copy printed, every word committed to someone else's memory, its hold spread.
He had become a vector, a carrier. He dressed in automatic motions, barely aware of the morning's routine, his mind racing with guilt and determination.
He gathered the original notebook, its cover now permanently etched with fingerprints and faint streaks of red, some ink, some perhaps not.
Before leaving, he glanced around his cramped apartment, half expecting to see the faceless figure from his dream standing in the hallway, patient, waiting.
Instead, only the silence greeted him.
But Michael knew now how quickly silence could betray.
He called Eric at the library.
"You were right," Michael said, skipping pleasantries. "They're saying it's a coincidence, but it isn't.
The manuscript's doing something.
People are dying, Eric."
"I think it's going to get worse." Eric's voice was taut. "Jenny called me too."
"There's talk in the faculty chat. Everyone's saying this is your fault."
"You didn't want to believe in curses, now you're living one. Maybe you should tell the police." Michael almost laughed.
The notion of a police detective believing in mystical curses belonged in pulp fiction, not in the real world. Yet he felt no safer for that distinction.
"If word gets out," he said, "the morbid-minded are going to hunt down every surviving copy.
We have to warn them. Maybe recover the books. Do
something." Eric hesitated, then finally said, "Jenny's right. This is out of our hands. Just don't do anything reckless." But Michael already felt irreversibly committed. Each new fatality weighed on him, the faces of the victims blurring into those from his nightly dreams. He became obsessed with maps, timelines, tracing the pattern of the deaths as though by charting the spread, he could contain it. Over the next days, the curse's reach became local law. The city's rumor mill spun wild tales. Some said the book's cover changed colors depending on who opened it. Others whispered that just seeing the words cemetery romance in print was enough to drive a reader mad. Social media swirled with speculation. Michael, though rarely active online, watched in growing horror as conspiracy theories turned strangers into amateur sleuths and would-be heroes. But the true nightmare unfolded quietly, person to person. When Michael visited the university library trying in vain to retrieve the cursed edition, he caught a pale, sleepless student staring at the book's display case. Their eyes were haunted, fingers trembling. Michael approached gently. "Hey, I'm Michael. Did you read it?" The student looked up, their lips split by a cold smile, as if the words cost them something. "It finds you, doesn't it?" they whispered. "I only read a chapter." That was all it needed. They backed away, their gaze never leaving Michael's hands where the original manuscript hid inside his coat. He wanted to warn them, to destroy every remaining page, but knew it was already too late. Something had been set in motion, and it wasn't entirely physical. His guilt morphed into paranoia. He noticed faces in crowds following him at a distance, sometimes colleagues, sometimes strangers he was certain he'd never met. When he rode the subway, he felt eyes flicking to his jacket pocket, pupils dilating in fascination or fear. Whispers drifted in corridors. "That's him, the one with the book." Trying to feel normal, Michael met Jenny one evening at a riverside park. The air reeked of damp earth and decaying leaves. The city's lights flickered on the water, fuzzy and distant. Jenny looked haggard, heart-shaped face drawn with worry. She didn't offer pleasantries either. "They're saying the curse is real now. People at the paper are talking about doing an expose. Some want to sensationalize it, call it America's new death manuscript." Michael buried his face in his hands. "This is my fault. I keep thinking if I burn the notebook, if I find all the copies." Jenny put a hand on his arm, her touch warm despite the chill. "Don't go it alone. Let me help. And listen, Mike, whatever is happening, it isn't just old words. People are scared, and fear makes them see things that weren't there before." But she, too, seemed to glance over her shoulder more often than usual, her words chased by doubt. They walked for hours, piecing together possible connections. The original Weathers legend, the cryptic warnings on gravestones, the mysterious deaths chronicled in old police records. Back in his apartment, Michael barricaded the door. He scoured the internet until dawn for any history of similar curses, a pattern, an antidote. He read obscure accounts, Egyptian scrolls that drove scribes mad, the Book of the Damned in the Vatican, and diaries from Salem that vanished before their writers' deaths. All told the same story. Some texts don't simply document evil, they carry it. The next day, Jenny called him in a panic. They found another one, Elise, the Chronicle's arts editor. She got her hands on the rare print and they said she went catatonic at her desk, just staring, muttering lines from the book. They have her at county medical now, but she's not responding. Michael felt his knees weaken. "It's spreading," he gasped. "It's not just death, it's madness." Is this what the warnings meant? Could something this old really act like a sickness? A meme? Something viral in more ways than one? Jenny hesitated. Should I go public with what we know? Warn everyone? Michael weighed the risks, the likelihood of causing mass panic against the chance to stifle the book's spread. Maybe, but say it's a legend. Downplay the details. Don't you let anyone know exactly where to find the manuscripts or how to recognize the real one. Promise me. Jenny agreed, her voice quavering. "And Mike, if it ever gets too much, call me. Please, I am on your side," he promised. But in truth, Michael didn't know if there was a true side anymore. The curse the book worked through him, as if he were nothing but an instrument in a story that predated him, a vessel for misery and legend bleeding across generations. In the following week, Michael learned the horror of isolation. Friends who once called now avoided him. Some wouldn't meet his eye in hallways. Others crossed the street rather than pass him on the sidewalk. Jenny's calls grew briefer, filled with static and wariness. Even Eric kept his distance, claiming library policy prevented any further involvement. Michael's apartment shrank into a cell. At night, shadows moved in the corners, sometimes forming words, sometimes faces, all whispering that it was his turn to pay the price. Once, scrawled condensation on the bathroom mirror read, "Nearly time." The manuscript on his nightstand seemed to glow faintly green whenever the lights were off. He slept less and less, but he wouldn't give up. He set to work cataloguing everything, the original's entries, the changes he'd noted in print editions, the times and dates of each victim's demise. He mapped patterns, desperate for logic, a crack in the curse's armor. A mad hope told him that if he solved the sequence, he could break the story's power. He clicked through emails from the families of the latest victims, each pleading for answers he was powerless to give. Once, a grieving mother returned a torn, blood-spattered copy of the published book to his mailbox. "Take it back," her note demanded. "Let us sleep again." The city, once the safe pattern of Michael's private world, had become a haunted ground. Cemetery Romance, the story never meant to be read, never meant to be understood, was no longer just his curse. Now the circle had widened, and with each dawn, Michael feared that, like every cursed character he'd ever read about, his time as survivor, as narrator, was running out. He stared into his own mirror, fingertips grazing the glass, and waited for it to whisper the last line. Haunted by the past, Michael's world narrowed to a singular quest, to break the curse before it swallowed everyone and left only names carved into cold stone. Each morning, he awoke later, his body heavy with sleeplessness and grief. He kept the curtains drawn tight, letting only the thinnest grey light crawl into his apartment. The notebook, once just a curiosity, was now a force pulling him ever deeper into the cryptic, predatory history of Cemetery Romance. He was no longer just its reader, he was its unwitting archivist, its guardian, and perhaps its final victim. He obsessed over every clue. His whiteboard, usually reserved for work projects, was now scrawled with dates and names, suicides, sudden collapses, unexplained disappearances. He traced the spread of the curse citywide, a morbid spiderweb connecting the corpses of curiosity seekers and the mind-broken, all tied to that impossibly old story. But as Michael dug deeper, he found that his own narrative was unspooling alongside the manuscripts. The lines blurred. In the half-lit hours between 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock a.m., unreality thickened. Once, he woke to find writing on his own arms, words in handwriting that perfectly matched the journal's elegant script. "He who follows becomes." The ink vanished by dawn, leaving his skin cold and clammy. Unable to bear the solitude, he reached out to Jenny. Meeting her felt risky, even dangerous, but she agreed. They chose a nearby coffee house, the kind with mismatched mugs and the scent of something always half-burned. Jenny sat with a blue scarf pulled tight around her neck, her eyes shadowed by more than a lack of sleep. "I spoke to some of the families," she murmured, voice trembling. "No one wants to talk about it, but they all said the same thing after reading the manuscript. Their loved ones changed. Paranoia, nightmares, dread. Some locked themselves in, others tried to warn people before." "Well, you know," Michael nodded, fighting the urge to look over his shoulder. "It's like the story eats you from the inside out," he said. "Like it wants you to be not just afraid, but empty, hollowed." He tried to keep his voice low,
but a tremor worked its way in.
I think I'm running out of time, Jenny. There are things happening I can't explain. Jenny pressed a slip of paper into his palm, a note, torn from the journal of Faith Weathers, one of the earliest supposed victims.
I found this in the library's microfiche.
The darkness wants a witness.
My name is fading, and soon my story won't matter.
If you find this, remember me. Remember us. Michael shuddered. She knew. Jenny put her hands back, tucking them beneath her scarf. I'm scared, Mike. The Chronicle pulled me of the story. Said they didn't want me anywhere near you or the curse.
But I need this to end, for my own sake.
For yours too. He was grateful.
He'd lost so many allies already.
Even Eric, fearful and superstitious as he had become, continued to help only at arm's length, feeding Michael old death notices, scanned obituary records, even cryptic messages sent after midnight from library burner accounts.
Alone again, Michael allowed himself a rare act of rebellion. In the dead of night, beneath cloud-thick sky, he returned to St. Alder's Cemetery and the Weathers Crypt. His shoes squelched through mud, his flashlight beam swinging over wild brambles and headstones so all their names crumbled to dust.
At the oldest Weathers grave, he knelt and traced the caution script carved into the marble.
Something flickered behind his eyes, a memory, or perhaps a vision.
He saw a young woman cradling a tattered journal, tears streaming down her face.
He heard whispers in the wind. Help us.
The story is hunger. The air itself thickened. It felt as if the ground might open and swallow him, his heart pounding. Michael noticed an envelope wedged beneath the stone, yellowed and slick from years of damp.
He pried it gently free. Inside, he found a single page written in a crabbed hand. To whom it may concern, the curse does not begin with reading alone. It is born of attention, of fear, and of retelling.
Weathers' name will die, but the story will not, for it devours the teller. Warn anyone who follows. Burn this,
or else remember me, though I am already gone.
Weathers. Michael's hands shook. He stumbled backward, slipping en masse, and only barely managed to keep from crying out. Night pressed tighter around him.
In that silence, he realized what the curse really was. Not just a series of coincidences, not even a true haunting, but a parasite, a meme, the fate of the mind that drew power from being read, being spoken.
Its only purpose, propagation and survival. Returning home, Michael feverishly scanned his own history. Who had he told?
How could he stop the spread? Was it already too late?
The faces of the dead crowded his dreams. Alan Fletcher, Faith Weathers, the pale student, Jenny's haunted colleagues.
They lined up in spectral processions behind his eyelids, all whispering the same refrain, "Tell our stories, or let us fade." But Michael could not stop himself, even as he attempted to burn a spare print of the novel, watching with dread as the paper sparked, then inexplicably went out. Unscorched, he knew the story was moving through him.
He began to see eerie patterns everywhere, numbers repeating in the clock, his name scrawled in condensation on the glass, glimpses of faceless figures in supermarket aisles or reflected in turning elevator doors.
One afternoon, sleep-deprived and wild, Michael watched the notebook flicker with phosphorescent light. In the absence of words, it communicated in other ways, now shadows growing denser, cold air bleeding in from nowhere, the keening whir of distant voices in the pipes. He drove out of town to visit the city's archives, desperate to find a birth or death record that would anchor the curse to one entity, to give it edges and limits. Yet everywhere in the files, the story repeated, names erased, records misplaced. Hundreds of victims disappeared from history as if erased by the very narrative they encountered.
Even the physical page seemed to resist being copied or photographed, lines blurring, words fading.
Michael gathered what little hope he had left. If memory was the only weapon against oblivion, perhaps he could preserve enough to warn others, to give voice to the silenced victims. He mapped their names, retyped their accounts, and published a single anonymous blog post. For anyone who finds themselves trapped by a story they never meant to read, remember us. We are what happens when you look too long into the dark.
Don't let the story end with your silence. He pressed publish, heart pounding, knowing full well that this measure could be both lifeline and contagion. But his own voice, thinning with exhaustion, refused to whisper the truth that his fate had already been sealed the moment he read the first line.
That evening, a ferocious storm battered the city.
Michael's electricity flickered and died. Alone in the dark, he watched the notebook's faint green glow and finally accepted what both Weathers and so many others had already learned, that the curse wanted witnesses, not survivors, and memory was a poor kind of resistance. As the storm raged, Michael sat back, closed his eyes, and listened to the haunted chorus of stories growing louder within him.
The past, it seemed, would not let go, or else it had already claimed him for its own. Isolation.
Michael's windows became the dividing line between his shrinking world and a city that felt increasingly hostile, or worse, utterly indifferent. With each new day, isolation grew more profound, drawn not only by the fear of spreading the curse, but by the sense that any shred of normal life was gone forever. Scenes from his former routines, chatting with the barista, joking with Jenny, even nodding at strangers in the library, faded into unreality.
Now, when he emerged onto the street, heads turned away. When he called, people let it ring. In this haunted city, Michael was both pariah and ghost, and the story, greedy for attention, was feeding on his loneliness as much as his memory.
He spent hours staring at walls, notebook open before him, trying to fight off the sleep that now came in sharp, violent bursts. When he drifted under, the line between waking and dreaming dissolved instantly. He walked through rain-lashed cemeteries that ran on forever.
Statues of angels scowled and pointed. Headstones bled black ink.
Always there was the manuscript in his hand, its cover burning cold. On the rare day he ventured out before dawn, hood pulled tight over sleepless eyes, Michael skirted the edge of St. Alder's. A sign had been erected, an iron warning in newly drilled bolts. Danger. Do not enter. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Beneath it, the gate, once rusty and swinging, was chained and padlocked.
He wondered who had ordered the closure, and if it had come too late.
His guilt thickened as news of additional deaths crept in.
He read obituaries, plain text accounts of young and old, prominent and forgotten, their fates written in clinical language, unexpectedly passed.
After a short illness, was found by family. Michael saw the code behind the words.
One obituary, for a teacher named Ruth Mathers, struck him sharply. She found joy in storytelling, but in her last days became obsessed with an old book. No mention of the title, yet Michael needed none.
Jenny called only once in these weeks of shadow. Mike, I'm sorry.
They're making cuts at the paper, and well, they're saying I'm too close to the story.
I think I need to stop just for a while. It's all gotten so strange. Her voice was thin, like radio static.
I keep thinking I see someone watching me from the street.
I know it's probably nothing, but please be careful.
I can't lose myself in this too. He whispered her name, but the line was already dead.
Left entirely alone, Michael tried to keep sanity by structuring his days.
He catalogued evidence obsessively, printing police reports, annotating folklore articles, even recording his dreams in frantic, jittery scrawls. He tried to reach Eric, but the librarian's only reply came in a string of texts. Archive boxes missing. Weathers records redacted. Please don't contact me again. Don't even mention the book.
Good luck.
Michael found that even the traces of the curse were withering under observation, as if the story itself abhorred scrutiny.
More maddening. No two versions of events seemed to match.
In some accounts, Faith Weathers had died in her sleep.
In others, she simply vanished, and her plot remained empty. a survivor from a previous generation, contacted by Michael through a tipsy, late-night phone call, hung up after hearing his name. Isolation fostered paranoia. Michael listened for footsteps outside his door. More than once, he watched shadowy figures loiter in the alley, shifting in and out of the half-light.
When he looked too long, their faces seemed pale familiar, and yet disturbingly incomplete, like half-remembered pages from his own past.
The supernatural phenomena took a harsher edge.
At night, a sickly green phosphorescence pulsed from the notebook, flickering silently across the peeling wallpaper.
Once, while reaching for a glass of water, Michael discovered the words "not yet" written in condensation on the kitchen counter. The message faded moments later, leaving only the memory and clammy fear in its place.
Sleep, when it came, brought Spectres his father, repeating stories from Michael's childhood, but now with endings as bleak as the city as fog.
Alan Fletcher, sitting at a desk with ink-stained hands, lips stitched shut. Jenny, walking away from him down a darkened corridor, whispering, "Don't follow me, Michael." Not here, on what felt like the longest night of his life. Michael heard knocking at the door, a sound so ordinary, and yet so terribly out of place that he nearly wept with relief.
He rushed to the peephole. No one was there, only a battered parcel resting on the stoop.
The package contained 3 things: a thumb drive, a photocopy of a police file, and a handwritten note. The note, scrawled in a shaky hand, read, "I shouldn't help you, but someone must remember."
Play the drive.
The story changes, but memory is the key. Inside, the thumb drive held only one file, a distorted audio recording, incomprehensible save for fragments of a frail voice repeating, "I read the story."
They say remembering saves you, but it's a lie.
The book always finds a way to be read again. Always. The police files detail the fate of Elise the Chronicle as arts editor who fell silent at her desk. The case was closed as acute stress reaction, but attached notes by an unnamed detective speculated on narrative contagion, referencing Michael by name.
That night, Michael fought a storm within a panic.
He realized that the curse's true power wasn't merely in death, but in how it stripped away support, poisoned relationships, and left its victims defenseless inside a crowd. Isolation wasn't just a consequence, it was the mechanism. The story wanted its readers alone, unable or unwilling to protect themselves as it worked its slow, corrosive magic. He took to wandering the city at night not to escape, but to look for others marked by the curse. Once, at the bus terminal, he spotted the pale student from the university, eyes wide and dilated, lips busy forming syllables of comfort for no one. The student looked up, as if recognizing Michael as a fellow sufferer, and gave a tired, broken smile before disappearing into the flood of travelers under flickering lights. By dawn, rain drove Michael back to his apartment.
The isolation pressed on him, suffocating and implacable, until he started to wish for the directness of a haunting, a spectre, or even the faceless figure from his nightmares. At least then, he might know his adversary.
Instead, he faced only silence, records erased, friends withdrawn, every word he spoke swallowed by the endless grey. He sat before the notebook, which now pulsed with quiet triumph, and for the first time, Michael wondered whether solitude itself was the truest curse. He pressed his palm against the cover, feeling some slow, maggot-like movement within the pages, and whispered, "What do you want from me? What do you want me to become?"
And in the hush before morning, he thought he heard it answer, gentle as a lullaby yet colder than death itself. Witness. Confronting the manuscript, Michael Jennings had always believed in solutions.
The kind you could diagram, troubleshoot, work through one persistent step at a time. But the manuscript defied his every attempt at reason. Its curse would not yield to logic, and no sequence of actions brought relief. Weeks slipped away as Michael clung to what remained of his sanity, treading the line between grim acceptance and wild, desperate action. No longer safe in his apartment, he felt the notebook's influence thrumming like a live wire. Sleep became a risk. Each dream was a trial, each nightmare a fresh wound. The phosphorescent glow dimmed whenever he tried to ignore it, but flared hot and angry as soon as he approached with intention, like a predator sensing its prey grow weary.
Isolation had forced Michael to become his own confidant, his own investigator.
He reviewed every case file, every archive scrap, finding the same conclusion. Resistance was rare, but not impossible. He needed to confront the manuscript, not as reader or victim, but as adversary.
If memory was the battle line, then maybe, just maybe, he had a chance to rewrite the rules.
He began with the most basic defenses. First, he attempted outright destruction. The notebook resisted. Fire would not catch, pages would not tear, and any attempt would result in his own hands trembling uncontrollably.
Abandoning brute force, Michael tried containment, sealed boxes, locked drawers, burial beneath heavy stones in his kitchen sink.
Each night he found the notebook back on his desk, its cover pulsing gently as though mocking his efforts.
His investigation deepened. He pored over the fragment from Bathweather's. Curse born of attention, of fear, devours the teller, warn anyone who follows. Those words haunted him, and a wild, maddening thought began to form. Maybe the curse demanded an audience. Perhaps the manuscript story fed on retelling, on transfer of suffering.
Michael pondered. Could he redirect the curse? Trick it? Refuse to be its mouthpiece? He devised experiments. He composed alternative versions of the notebook's warning entry, rewriting phrases, translating the lines into other languages, and in one fit of inspiration, recording himself reading nonsense versions out loud.
But with every new attempt, the notebook's true script surfaced: a phrase on a wall, a cold whisper at the edge of sleep, a dream too vivid to discount.
Sometimes when he blinked at a blank page, letters appeared, not yours. Not enough. Despair grew.
Michael spent hours wandering empty city blocks, haunted by reflections in glass doors and echoes swelling from alleyways. The city was changing. Even those who'd never touched a copy seemed gripped by a growing paranoia, a restless insomnia that crackled through conversations and social media posts.
Michael wondered if the curse was not just words, but a contagion, viral, psychic, leaking into the collective unconscious by sheer force of obsession.
One evening, as rain battered St. Alder's gates, Michael returned to the cemetery, his mind whirling with half-formed strategies.
He carried the manuscript wrapped in a plastic bag, determined to return it to its grave. Tom Brubaker, the caretaker, was nowhere to be found.
The place felt abandoned, tombs looming dark and hungry in the storm.
Steeling his nerves, Michael traced his path to the old weather's plot. The caution inscription, eroded but defiant, greeted him like an old enemy. He knelt, pried up a loose slab, and wedged the notebook deep within the dirt, covering it with stones and a layer of wet leaves. He whispered, "Stay buried this time.
Let your story end."
But it was not enough. Lighting split the sky, illuminating a figure at the edge of the tree's tall, cloaked face obscured by rain and shadows. Michael froze. The apparition raised a pale hand, and for a moment, the wind seemed to carry a rush of voices. "We told you not to come back." Heart racing, Michael retreated to his car. But when he arrived home, the notebook lay on his desk, dry and unblemished, as though untouched by storm. He tried again and again. He mailed the book to an anonymous address, left it in a library's donation box, even hurled it into the river on a frigid night.
Each time, it returned. Once he woke from shallow sleep to find it open at a new entry, one he had never seen. Witnesses flee,
but the story always finds a new mouth.
If you will not tell it, another will. It struck Michael that true confrontation wouldn't come from running or destroying, but from accepting his role. He was the chosen witness, the living storyteller the curse needed to propagate. only by refusing to retell the legend in its true form. In other words, by distorting, diminishing, and diluting the story to meaninglessness could he hope to weaken its grip.
Desperate, Michael began recording endless audio logs, diaries full of fabricated details, versions of cemetery romance that turned terrifying curses into mere coincidences, even comedy. He shared these files anonymously on forums, Reddit, anywhere he could. With each upload, he watched for signs: a light dimming, a pulse quickening in his chest, the return of the notebook. Sometimes he sensed the curse recoiling, weakening, but it would only last a few hours before the familiar symptoms returned: cold sweats, flickers of unnatural shadow, sense that he wasn't alone. One sleepless dawn, Michael made public his intent. He wrote on every available surface, "The story ends here. Enough fear.
Enough death." He taped over the notebook's cover with a sheet of printer paper, scrawling, "This is not the manuscript you're looking for." Yet deep down, he knew the truth. The curse couldn't be tricked by games or falsehoods. It was older than him, older than anyone in the city. It thrived on meaning, on memory, on being witnessed and passed on like an infection of human empathy and horror.
Its grip could be loosened, perhaps briefly, but never fully broken.
By evening, Michael collapsed on his couch, utterly spent, the notebook open and pulsing with phosphorescent gloom. He heard Jenny's voice in his mind, "Don't go it alone," and for the first time, he understood complete isolation was the curse's crucible, that collaboration, empathy, and shared resistance, however fleeting, were the only balm.
He dialed Jenny's number. This time, she answered. "Mike, are you okay?"
He took a shaky breath.
"No, but I need you to remember. And I need you to help me tell a new story. Not of horror, but of survival." Her voice grew steadier. "Tell me everything."
"I'll write it down."
"I'll help you." They talked until sunrise. Two witnesses locked in shared resistance. Michael felt the curse retreat for the first time, not vanished, but starved of its usual fuel. But outside, the city braced for dawn. Michael knew the confrontation was far from over. The manuscript wasn't done. Not yet. Somewhere in the shadows of his apartment, he sensed pages rustling, hungry for a reader and a witness once more.
Descending, Michael Jennings felt his final reserves eroding.
The city no longer seemed like a place he inhabited, but a hazy stage where the curse played out its endless cycles. He moved through each day like a ghost, his thoughts grinding down to white noise. Every attempt to resist, to collaborate, to bargain with the force behind cemetery romance had proved only temporary, a ceasefire with something eternal, patient, and hungry. The notebook followed him everywhere, restlessly shifting locations with the same predatory intelligence that haunted his nightmares. Sometimes it would be on his desk when he woke. Sometimes he'd find it perched atop the bathroom sink or splayed across the kitchen counter, spine warped, demanding attention. Nothing he did hiding it, yielding it to rivers. Even giving it away to strangers kept it gone for long. It seemed keenly attuned to the moments when his defenses flagged and despair threatened to take him fully. The descent began in earnest as November drew near its end, the 1-month cycle ticking down like a doomsday clock. Michael noticed symptoms he recognized from the stories: the unraveling sense of time, the whispers in mirrors, the gnawing conviction that his memories were being overwritten by someone else's. He kept a ledger on his phone, marking sleep cycles, recording dreams and hallucinations, tracking the ways his identity seemed to corrode day after day. He called Jenny each morning, and though her voice remained a lifeline, it grew fainter as both of them drifted toward exhaustion. They'd share notes, compare stories, remind each other of real events, working feverishly to construct and anchor anything to resist the manuscript's pull. But the curse didn't just isolate and terrorize. It began to edit reality itself. Michael's apartment felt less and less familiar. Photographs on his wall faded in color, faces blurring or vanishing altogether. The news, when he could bear to read it, grew increasingly surreal, reporting epidemic rates of insomnia, psychic distress, and unexplained disappearances. Old Tom Brubaker was found wandering St. Alders one night, muttering in tongues about the storyteller coming home. Eric left the city altogether, sending only a final text. If I stop remembering, it might stop following.
Please forgive me.
The notebook began to write entries by itself. Michael would find new pages each morning, sometimes recounting memories he didn't recognize, childhood birthdays that never happened, arguments with friends he'd never met. The boundary between the book's fictions and his life crumbled at the edges, erasing the neatness of chronology and identity.
There were nights when Michael dreamt he was Bath Weathers, watching his own life from afar. Other times he inhabited the mind of Alan Fletcher, reliving the compulsion to read and spread the story.
He lost time.
One Sunday, he woke with no recollection of the previous day, his clothes torn and mud-caked. There were footprints on his foyer floor, small and childlike, fading into the wall.
The calendar flashed past in fits and starts. Sometimes Michael felt he hadn't slept in weeks.
Other times, he awoke from hours of deep oblivion only to find his watch stuttering, the hands whirring backward.
Increasingly, the curse's avatars moved with him. The faceless figure became a constant presence, sometimes pacing outside his window, sometimes leaning just beyond the circle of lamplight. Each time Michael looked away, it would be gone, but its absence felt like a threat, not a relief. Descent shifted from psychological to physical.
Michael became gaunt, his skin pallid, eyes raked by sleeplessness.
He tried to eat, but food tasted like dust. He stopped shaving, lost track of basic routines. Messages from Jenny grew more desperate. "They're watching me now, Mike," she confessed one night, voice raw with fear.
"But I think it's not just the book, it's us.
We're carriers.
Something in us transmits the story.
I see strangers on the street, their lips moving.
I hear your name when I dream."
Michael gripped a phone, panic and hope dueling for dominance.
"We have a few days left.
Please, Jenny, hold on.
The month will end, and then the legend says it stops." She gave a trembling laugh.
The legend lies, Mike.
It's just how the story survives new reader, new cycle, new tragedy.
If we're lucky, we'll forget before it finds another. Their conversations became mantras of survival.
They would repeat facts to each other, birthdays, favorite foods, embarrassing stories from college, working to protect some sense of self from the encroaching fiction.
Sometimes this helped.
Sometimes it felt futile, as if every word was just one more syllable in the curse's endless retelling. On the eve of the month's climax, Michael left his apartment for the cemetery of final pilgrimage, one last act of defiance.
The streets felt deserted, the city murmuring beneath a river of fog. He moved quickly, the manuscript clutched to his chest, the faceless figure trailing him at a careful distance. At St. Alders, the new iron gates were bent and twisted.
Someone or something had forced an entry since his last visit. Wind howled as he moved among the graves, the old Weathers plot gleaming an impossibly pale gold in the moonlight.
Michael knelt, placed the notebook as deep as he could, and whispered, "No more. Not this time.
I won't tell your story.
I won't be your voice." He remained there until sunrise, holding vigil against the pull of memory and dread. Occasionally, he heard whispers, saw movements just out of sight, felt the cold breath of the forgotten brushing his neck.
But he did not flee.
And as morning broke, he felt something shift, a pause, a crack, a lull in the storm of repetition. Returning home, he found the notebook gone, no longer on his desk, no longer in sight.
He allowed himself a fragile, flickering hope.
But the phone rang an hour later. Jenny's voice was fractured, desperate.
I woke up with words carved into my wall. "Welcome, witness. I thought we could fight it, Mike, but it changed.
I think I might be the next mouthpiece now." Michael sat, head in hands, The city hissing outside, clock ticking down.
He finally understood. The curse's mechanism was not in the book, not only in stories told, but in the hearts of its keepers. Not only the manuscript demanded a teller, anyone who bore witness, who survived long enough to remember, risked becoming the next author, the next carrier.
Descent was never about death alone. It was about the story's persistence. In that wrenching hour before sunset, Michael wrote a final entry in his phone. We became the manuscript.
All of us who survived, remembered, resisted. We are every page, every line, every retelling.
The curse is in memory, in survival, in the will not to let the horror end with us.
And in one final act, I choose not just to witness, but to warn. He sent the message to Jenny, then deleted every previous file, every copy, every trace of the manuscript. But even as he pressed delete, Michael knew the story would return somewhere, somehow, in a new generation, a new time, hungry as ever, because Cemetery Romance was no longer just a book.
It was all of them.
The final transition. The month ebbed away beneath November's gloom, and Michael Jennings felt every hour as if it scratched a tally mark deep into his bones.
In the world outside, winter pressed closer, crawling down the city's empty boulevards, gasping through cracks beneath doors. But in Michael's world, a shrinking clutch of memories, warnings, and voices. Time was both accelerating and shattering, days and nights slipping through each other like sheets of warped glass.
He spent his last days in a ritual of resignation and fierce defiance, determined not simply to yield to the curse, but to shape its end by his own hand.
Michael methodically staged his apartment for departure. Every trace of the notebook was burned, every research file shredded, passwords changed and devices scrubbed clean. The futile hope of erasure comforted him, even as he knew the curse thrived on being shared and remembered. Jenny's calls had grown frantic, then eerily calm.
I keep hearing the ending in my sleep, she confessed on the penultimate evening. Voice so soft, he strained to catch each word. It wants us to finish the story, Mike. It wants us to tell everyone how it ends. He tried to soothe her, but his own voice betrayed him, shaking with exhaustion, desperation, and the faintest undercurrent of something like awe. It was dawning on Michael that the curse, for all its cruelty, had an artistry. It knew how to survive, to adapt, how to weave its way into every fracture of human longing for meaning, connection, or finality. That night, sleep finally took him down deep. He dreamt vividly.
St. Alders stood in winter, gravestones sheathed in frost, the air aglow with foxfire blues. The faceless figure approached him, and as Michael watched, it gained features: a mouth, a hand, a pair of fear-bright eyes that mirrored his own. You are the story, Michael, it whispered.
You brought us here.
In the dream, Michael could see all the curse's victims. Faith Withers in pale mourning lace, Alan Fletcher with journal in hand, the university student, Elise, even old Tom carrying keys to eternal gates.
They formed a circle, reaching out not in accusation, but in welcome, a chain of voices, a family of storytellers. With every retelling, a piece of them had survived.
The figure leaned in, its breath icy with the future. Your mark is memory.
When you leave, so does your story. What would you do with your last line? He woke gasping, alone, his skin clammy with the last chills of nightmare.
That morning, Michael paced the apartment, touching objects one by one: photos, keepsakes, the battered coffee mug Jenny once gifted him.
From the street below, the world sounded as it always had, ordinary, indifferent, bustling forward.
But in Michael's heart, the voice of the manuscript now spoke with his own timbre, weaving past and present together. Witness, warn, end.
He left his apartment just after noon, walking across the city with only his phone in his pocket. No notebook, no files, just the echo of stories that would not leave.
The air was sharp, brass bright, leaves scuttling at his feet like nervous animals. He passed St. Orders, now chained and posted with new police warnings. Unsafe structure. Do not enter.
Instead of slipping past the gates, Michael waited at their edge, scanning the tangled plots and broken markers lying in shadow.
He spoke quietly, barely audible even to himself. The story ends here. If you're listening, remember us. Don't bring this curse back. Don't let your memory become its mouthpiece. A hush fell.
He heard nothing, no phantom voices, no chorus of dead, no flicker of green fire. For the first time since the curse began, Michael felt utterly alone, and it was
peaceful.
He wandered home as dusk painted the city purple and gold. He texted Jenny, "It's time.
Don't read anything more.
Burn your notes. Forget if you can, I'll try to do the same." Her reply came minutes later. "Thank you, Mike.
I remember you,
but I won't tell the story." That night, Michael settled into bed in an unfamiliar calm.
The manuscript did not appear on his desk. There were no knocks, no whispering shadows, only the honest exhaustion that had eluded him for a month. He closed his eyes and relaxed into the darkness. He dreamed no dreams. The morning papers did not mention Michael's death because he did not die. He simply faded from view, his actions so deliberately obscured that no one could chart the line between last message and disappearance. Jenny sometimes visited St. Orders to leave flowers by the rusted gate, murmuring thanks not for salvation, but for defiance well fought. The city moved on another winter, new losses and joys. The legend of the cursed manuscript, too, fell into silence. Some said the story had burned itself out completely, that memory could be erased by act of will. Others warned, in hushed voices behind closed doors, that the darkness need only one witness left to find its way back.
But for now, the curse seemed sated, and silence brave. Lonely silence held sway, and in a drawer somewhere, a battered notebook lay dormant, its pages blank and waiting. It would slumber there for years, decades perhaps, until someone new asked how the story ended. Remember to like and subscribe to Verified Nightmare.
The end.